earliest thinkers to explain the origin of form in biological production, suggesting that the father contributes the essential characteristics of the offspring, while mothers contribute only a material substrate. It's important to note the similarity between supposed ancient Greek Neoplatonic thought and the magical systems used by the alchemist. The question is, were the Greek philosophers secretly alchemists and discussing a different type of biological production? This will all be brought to question. Spontaneous generation can be found in ancient works by revered poets like Ovid. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, he describes the creation of life through alchemical elements, the earth, the air, and water, bringing forth, suggesting that living organisms originated from inanimate elements, wind combined with fire. Another ancient Greek author on this subject is Anaximander, who believed that life originated from a primordial mixture of earth and water, and that simpler organisms emerged first, followed by more complex life forms. This arguably is the precursor to modern evolution, as Anaximander suggested that humans initially arose from a different type of animal, possibly a fish or fish-like creature, and that the early human ancestors underwent a process of gradual development and adaptation to life on land. The key difference other than natural selection being Anaximander believed in a primordial mixture and the concept of spontaneous creation. There are other authors who speak on this. Interestingly, the Greek philosopher Empedocles, who lived in the 5th century BC, proposed that heavy rainfall mixing with the earth would become fertile and spontaneously generate various life forms. He believed that the combination of water and earth produced a wide range of organisms, including insects and other small creatures. The idea is that these ancient authors, including Aristotle himself, were just simply mistaken, according to these mainstream historians. Interestingly, in Homer's Iliad, there's a section in Book 19 where it discusses a body being defiled by flies, and the possibility that worms would come from them digging into the wounds. What this shows is that they were well aware of the life cycle of a fly, so obviously they were discussing some other matter here when it comes to the spontaneous creation of other animals such as mice and frogs. They knew about the fly life cycle, but it would take over 2,000 years from this first reference to supposedly debunk spontaneous generation? I'm not so sure if I buy that whole story. Before we get into the details of the homunculus, it's important to understand that there was an entire debate on this subject. This is a matter that had already been discussed for thousands of years, and then took hundreds of years of debate. But even in the mid-1800s, when Darwin published On the Origin of Species, his entire theory depended on spontaneous generation, or as Thomas Huxley termed it, abiogenesis. According to the skeptics, the late 1600s experiment by Francesco Redi supposedly debunks the notion of spontaneous generation entirely. This really isn't a fair argument, as it's debatable whether or not this experiment completely debunks spontaneous generation as a whole. First, it is important to note that Redi was a Jesuit with a mission to debunk spontaneous generation, a belief that was widely held at that time. And interestingly, during the 17th century, around the same time as Redi's experiment, the concept of the homunculus began to fade from the mainstream scientific discourse. Redi is often considered a turning point in disproving the theory of spontaneous generation, but the subject of spontaneous generation is not limited to simply flies and worms. 1. It was an experimental design, and it really was not comprehensive enough to fully debunk spontaneous generation in its entirety, yet it is constantly referenced in that manner. It is possible to argue that this experimental design did not account for all the possible scenarios. 2. There are numerous historical references to spontaneous generation from respected figures such as many Greek philosophers and even Roman poets, yet they were aware of the life cycle of the fly. 3. It really is a subjective interpretation of the outcome of the experiment and could be argued flawed completely. For example, the reason the maggots did not form in the sealed jars is because the necessary conditions for their formations were just not met. In many cases, the instructions for spontaneous generation are cryptic and ritualistic in nature. Who's to say he performed the ritual correctly? These experiments were in the late 1660s. It is an important experiment to know, as it initiated further scientific study, but of course, that's just the mainstream narrative. Ironically, modern mainstream historians scoff at the idea of spontaneous generation. but in many cases, they are willing to consider alternative sci-fi ideas such as panspermia that suggest life could have originated from extraterrestrial sources, which could be considered a type of spontaneous generation. This presents an intriguing point for consideration, as there appear to be some contradictions within the mainstream explanation. The prevailing view is that alchemy began to fade following Reddy's experiments and the increasing prominence of research using modern scientific methods. Supposedly, these experiments started to challenge the ideas held by alchemists a few centuries prior during the Renaissance. However, this time period was also known as the Enlightenment. So which is it? Were the alchemists simply misguided? The situation seems paradoxical because even after alchemy had begun to fade from mainstream science, prominent scientists in the 1700s, such as Isaac Newton, remained interested in alchemy as if it were a lost secret knowledge awaiting rediscovery. Why was Newton studying alchemy even hundreds of years after it declined in scientific thought? He would even correspond with Robert Boyle, the first chemist and one of the founders of modern chemistry, discussing the subject of alchemy in secrecy. Not only did they keep their interest secret, but it also became their life's work. Newton was the president of the Royal Society for over 20 years. That's a pretty big deal, and although there isn't any specific proof that Newton was a Freemason, there are many arguments to support that he could have indeed been connected or associated with a secret order of some kind. I mean, the Royal Society itself, as well as the foundation of modern science, was influenced by Masonry, so it's a pretty fair question. Now, as we progress, we'll be taking a look into the history of secret societies and the use of cryptic occult symbolism. This will assist in understanding how some of this information may have been lost or suppressed over time. The Royal Society was founded by Robert Boyle, who we know was deeply associated with alchemy, and by another figure named Christopher Wren, the famous English architect responsible for rebuilding 52 churches after the Great Fire of, what a coincidence, 1666, which that's a whole story of its own on how it was possibly set up by the Masons. Forgetting all that, it's well established that Christopher Wren was a Freemason. Therefore, what we're looking at with this revival of alchemy is that during this later time period of the early 1700s, knowledge from a previous generation of elite brotherhoods were lost and discussed between the higher echelons of society. In this case, the scientific elite of the later Enlightenment period were attempting to rediscover or preserve the secret of the sciences of earlier brotherhoods. So, some people are willing to believe that in the present day, that aliens have the ability to clone, and we've seen this in many movies many times, or that the government is secretly cloning individuals and that there are hidden underground cloning laboratories. Whether this is true or not, if you're willing to consider such possibilities in the modern time, well, it's only fair to consider that similar activities may have occurred in the past as well. Cloning? This could have been the most closely guarded secret of the esoteric societies, which were controlled by the royal elite families during that time. Of course, some may argue that this is because we possess a different technology and scientific understanding today. However, that argument originates from a perspective fed to us by these royal societies, Rosicrucians, Jesuits, and Freemasonic brothers, or the 17th century scientists unveiling new scientific advancements and technological progressions. But many of these scientists and their findings are funded by these royal elite institutions, which can be clearly identified through their coat of arms. Even if we trust the mainstream narrative and the level of technology presented for each age, we should always consider that the highest forms of technology would be guarded by the elite of its time. For example, something like the Ark of the Covenant. Perhaps this science didn't involve or depend on the need for modern machinery or electronics, but instead, it was an advanced occult art whose technique had been guarded for ages. The homunculus can essentially be divided into multi-layered definitions because it simply does not refer to one thing. This will be clear as we progress. The ancient practice of creating a homunculus far precedes alchemy, but we'll highlight that the subject of the homunculus is deeply integrated with the deepest secrets of the alchemical and hermetic tradition. Many have interpreted the Philosopher's Stone as simply a means for creating gold from base metals. But the bigger secret is that the Philosopher's Stone was used for creating artificial life. The homunculus represents far more than just a tiny man or creature created in a jar. One, It refers to a secret ancient art and knowledge of generation in combination with alchemy or the capturing and moving of souls. 2. A secret occult double, a double body, another vehicle for consciousness. 3. The capturing of a soul into a non-living object. 4. Esoteric secrets, which we'll get to towards the end. There is much to cover, and every definition will be explained. But this is a huge subject because the homunculus embodies humanity's quest for forbidden knowledge and our curiosity to uncover the mysteries of life. Many different subjects connect, especially when we connect it with an understanding of alternative history, false timelines, and other subjects we have covered in the past. In this investigation of the homunculus, we will cover some of the most prominent subjects associated with this concept, shedding light on their historical significance and impact on the development of modern science. We will focus on the contributions of several influential scientists who were captivated by the mysteries of the homunculus and the principles of alchemy, and how their work significantly shaped the course of scientific inquiry. I'm sure that most of you have heard about John Dee, or the real 007, the advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, who was also known for his heavy association with the occult, attempting to communicate with angels using an Enochian language, which he claimed was used by supernatural beings. He was deeply interested in alchemy and amassed a massive library of alchemical texts for his studies. He's a very interesting figure because it shows the connection between the governments or elites at their time and how the courts were filled with high-ranking figures well-versed in alchemy and the occult. He is claimed to be the founder of the Rosicrucian Order, a secret society preceding the Masons, said to be founded around this time period. But it's very likely that they are a secret ancient Catholic order, and we will show this later. But it can indeed be quite shocking, as the Rosicrucians are typically associated with Protestants after the 1600s. But there is more to that story, much more to connect when it comes to secret societies, their ancestry, and their relation to this knowledge. The Rosicrucians were fascinated with alchemy, Hermeticism, and blended these ideas with Christian motifs. Some say that there's no evidence to suggest that he was a Rosicrucian, but these writings were responsible for an occult revolution in Europe. But the question is, did this interest in alchemy and the homunculus really all start in the early 17th century? Or does this tradition go back from before the creation of religion? Well, there's much more to that story, and there were many other prominent figures from that time period who not only had a massive impact on science and history, but were deeply associated with secret societies. We have an entire section where we dive into the Elizabethan era later and explore his other associates. It would be a great task to cover occult philosophy in its entirety, but it may be important to note for a moment some key points. Hermeticism, an ancient philosophical and spiritual tradition, traces its roots back to the legendary figure Hermes Trismegistus. Often described as the founder of the tradition, Hermes is believed to have authored the Emerald Tablets, a collection of texts that laid the foundation for Hermetic philosophy. These teachings, which have persisted for centuries, delve into the concepts of duality, the union of opposites, and androgynous symbols. At the core of Hermeticism lies the Emerald Tablets, a series of writings that outline the key tenets of the philosophy. Among these principles is the idea of the union of opposites that suggests that everything in existence possesses a dual nature. This concept of duality is further explored through the symbolism of the sun and moon, which represent positive and negative forces respectively. In addition to the notion of duality, Hermeticism also encompasses androgynous symbols, signifying the perfect balance between masculine and feminine energies. This union is often depicted through the marriage of the sun and moon, embodying the harmony of opposing forces. Hermes Trismegistus is said to be the messenger of the gods, and can be traced back to Thoth, who is believed to be an Atlantean. This ancient ancestry links Hermeticism to a lineage of knowledge that dates back thousands of years. During the medieval ages in the 1600s, Hermeticism gained prominence among scientists and thinkers who were intrigued by its ancient wisdom. The teachings of Hermes Trismegistus were passed around and studied, fueling a revival of interest in the Hermetic tradition. This resurgence of Hermeticism had a significant impact on various fields, including alchemy and the exploration of the homunculus. The homunculus embodies the Hermetic principle of the union of opposites, illustrating how the fusion of opposing forces can give rise to new life. Even the origin of the term hermetically sealed, or the process of creating an airtight container, which was crucial to the progression of the scientific enlightenment, can also be traced back to Hermes. We're going to see a lot of three symbolism in this video, as Hermes Trismegistus means thrice greatest Hermes. This figure was believed to be the divine scribe, credited with authoring the sacred hermetic works that explored both the material world and the pursuit of spiritual perfection. Alchemists, or the leading scientists of their time, were deeply interested in these subjects, and they adopted Hermes Trismegistus as their patron. Another aspect to consider is the mandrake, as interestingly, it's brought up many times during this period, but this lore, although not exactly the same as the homunculus, is definitely connected, and most of us are well aware of this plant. But the mandrake has been associated with this concept of the homunculus, and according to the occult tradition and alchemical philosophy, the mandrake acts as a homunculus and can be sealed in a bottle to serve or represent the magician themselves. It is also said to have hallucinogenic and supernatural properties. If uprooted, it would scream, killing anyone who heard it. This is very similar to another story we'll hear later. It also seems that this has alchemical applications in the forms of potions and spells, and that the power of the mandrake extended beyond ingesting it. To use it as a fertility aid, the root could be placed under a person's pillow, or it could be kept close to someone ill to treat their condition. In the film Pan's Labyrinth, for example, the heroine places the root in a saucer of milk under her sick mother's bed. Roots were sometimes carved to enhance their human form, and could be carried on the person as a charm or talisman, not only to help with conception, but to help find love and bring good fortune. It has a long history of medicinal use, and one of the oldest and most common uses was a fertility aid. In Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, Jacob's wives, the sister, Leah and Rachel, compete to provide him with children with the help of a mandrake. In the 1st century, the ancient Greek physician and botanist Pedanius Dioscorides noted the human-like form of the mandrake's roots and indicated its use as an anesthetic for surgical procedures such as amputation. The golem is also connected with this. There are some differences, but it's important that we cover it. A golem is an anthropomorphic being crafted from lifeless materials like clay or mud and is brought to life through ritual incantations and sequences of Hebrew letters. In many golem stories, the creature serves as a helper, companion, or savior of an endangered Jewish community. However, in some tales, the golem spirals out of control and becomes a threat to its creator. The most renowned golem legend takes place in Prague and features the scholarly Rabbi Lowe. The first practical instructions for creating a golem can be found in medieval commentaries on the Sefer Yetzirah. It is believed that fashioning a golem was a means for medieval Jewish mystics to draw closer to God. The story of the Golem of Prague is set in the late 16th century during the reign of Emperor Rudolf II. At this time, the Jewish community in Prague was under threat due to anti-Semitic attacks and accusations of blood libel. Rabbi Lowe, a respected leader and scholar, sought to protect the Jewish community from these threats. According to the legend, Rabbi Lowe created the golem using clay from the banks of the Vitava River. He then performed a series of rituals, including the use of divine names, to bring the golem to life. The golem, named Yosel, was tasked with protecting the Jewish community from harm. Yosel, the Golem of Prague, was said to be immensely strong and able to turn invisible. It patrolled the streets of the Jewish ghetto at night, protecting its inhabitants from anti-Semitic attackers and even foiling blood libel plots. However, the golem could not speak and eventually became uncontrollable, leading Rabbi Lowe to deactivate it. The golem is brought to life by inscribing Hebrew words on its forehead, such as the word emet, which means truth in Hebrew. To deactivate the golem, one could remove the aleph in emet, changing the inscription from truth to death, met meaning dead. The history of the golem reaches back to early Judaism. In the Talmud, Adam is initially created as a golem when his dust is kneaded into a shapeless husk. Just like Adam, all golems are created from mud by those close to divinity, but no anthropogenic golem is for the human. Essentially, it is a story of the magical power of the Hebrew language. Its origins can be traced back to the Sefer Yetzirah, which is a book attributed to the biblical Abraham. Medieval commenters on the Sefer Yetzirah have even believed that Abraham and Jeremiah were able to utilize the knowledge within the book to create, quote, living beings. The fact that Abraham was aware of these methods of creating artificial life will be relevant later in the video. Albertus Magnus, sometimes referred to as Albert the Great or Saint Albert, was a German Dominican friar, bishop, philosopher, theologian, and scientist. He was born in Lauingen, Swabia, present-day Germany, and was a well-known figure in the intellectual and spiritual spheres of the 13th century. Albertus Magnus was a prolific writer. His works covered a wide range of topics, including logic, metaphysics, ethics, natural sciences, and theology. He was a key figure in the development of scholasticism, a philosophical and theological system that sought to reconcile faith and reason by integrating Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. Albertus Magnus is also linked to a very mysterious piece of ancient technology, the Brazen Head. This mysterious head, supposedly made of brass or bronze, is believed to answer any question and provide wisdom to its creator. Some say Albertus Magnus was its creator, and others claim it was the creation of Franciscan friar Roger Bacon. Legend has it that Bacon built the Brazen Head to help him in the pursuit of knowledge and to uncover the universe's secrets. Sadly, the Brazen Head was destroyed when Bacon didn't listen to its advice, causing the loss of its wisdom and knowledge. In another story, Albertus Magnus is said to have created a Brazen Head that could speak and answer questions. However, his student, Thomas Aquinas, allegedly destroyed the automaton, fearing it was a tool of the devil. It's not entirely clear where the Brazen Head originated. Some people think it was inspired by the Greek myth of Talos, a massive bronze automaton crafted by Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths and artisans. Others think that it may have come from the Jewish legend of the Golem. In a way, this can be seen as the ancient form of what we're seeing today with ChatGPT. Is this some historical reference to artificial intelligence that they were using in the exact same way that we're attempting to do? The difference is that modern AI systems are purely code and simulate the brain. Most of what we experience today in language transformers have to be thoroughly trained manually and depend on complex hardware. However, with the Brazen Head, this would have been powered metaphysically with true artificial intelligence. This would be far more powerful, as they essentially have the ability to speak with some type of all-knowing spirit. It literally involves the creation of a non-human entity, or you could say homunculus, capable of processing information, answering questions, and providing knowledge. It seems to be the exact same thing as ChatGPT, but far more powerful, and if it's possible that this may be a true story, then what other kind of technology did some of these royals or secret brothers have access to? So I guess you could say that the Brazen Head was an early precursor to the idea of artificial intelligence, with both aiming to create an entity capable of providing knowledge and wisdom. However, the way that they were created and the forces that powered them are vastly different. There's actually more to this story, and we'll come back in a later section. Alchemy can find its roots in Egypt, with the term itself originating from the Arabic al-Khamia, and a possible root is the ancient Egyptian word kemet, which refers to the black soil of the Nile River Valley. This fertile soil was associated with life and transformation, concepts that would later become integral to alchemical practices. Egypt was extremely occult, with its rich esoteric symbolism and complex rituals permeating various aspects of daily life and spiritual practices. Egypt was home to a complex pantheon of gods and goddesses, as well as initiation ceremonies in the mystery schools, both of which showcase the occult and alchemical aspects of ancient Egyptian spirituality. The moniker Hermes Trismegistus, an amalgamation of the Hellenic deity Hermes and the honorific title Thrice Great, finds its roots in the ancient Egyptian pantheon's Thoth, the divine patron of scribes and master of sacred symbols. Egypt's beliefs surrounding the afterlife, rebirth, and mummification further contributed to alchemical values. Preservation of the body through mummification was essential for the survival of one's life force, or Ka, in the afterlife. We all know of the ancient astronaut theory. Mainstream scholars and popular authors for some reason conclude that aliens are involved with Egypt, such as with the Dendera light bulb. Is this really a light bulb? or is it instructions for creating a homunculus? The Dendera temple is dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Comparable to Mary, she was the mother of Horus and Ra, yet also Ra's feminine counterpart, forming an androgynous being. Hathor embodies both Mary Magdalene and the whore of Babylon, the Scarlet Harlot. She also helps souls in the afterlife as they transition and is often accompanied by another god. This god is Heket, the Egyptian goddess of fertility who is represented in the form of a frog. The symbol of the frog was their ancient symbol of fertility, and it seems to represent spontaneous generation. The princess kissed the frog. These gods often had counterparts, serving not only as spouses but also as divisions of a primary hermaphroditic deity, illustrating the duality and unity in their divine nature. If we look at the full depiction, who's operating the ritual? Heket, and this is all for Hathor. The snake is being held by two hands, and we see a snake inside the light bulb, or more likely, a sperm in a flask. This seems more likely to be an alchemical process of the creation of an artificial life, rather than some type of light generator, as Egypt was known for having tools to assist in the process of getting pregnant and giving birth. Before going any further, we must go over Paracelsus. Born Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, the Swiss physician, alchemist, and philosopher who lived during the Renaissance period, early 1500s, but shockingly, he is literally the father of toxicology, so we know that all his credentials check out. He was a revolutionary figure in the history of medicine, challenging the traditional medical practices of his time and advocating for a more holistic approach to healing. But beyond his contributions to the field of medicine, Paracelsus was also deeply involved in the world of the occult. He was a member of various secret societies, such as the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, or, in other words, the Rosicrucians. This brotherhood predates the Freemasons by hundreds of years, and back to the Knights Templar. A similarity and connection between them is evident in their images and coat of arms, but this will be explained later in the video. He was a contemporary of Leonardo da Vinci, Martin Luther, who was responsible for Protestant Reformation, which shows how the Rosicrucians did have an impact and influence the Reformation. Paracelsus inspired an entire medical enlightenment period, and the reason I'm going on about this is because, well, let's delve into some of the lesser known aspects of Paracelsus' life and work, particularly his connections to the homunculus and the darker, more secretive parts of his writings. First off, most of his depictions are post-human portraits, and he's typically seen holding a sword and a prophet for the Rosicrucians. But in one depiction, there's something in the background subtly placed. It's the head of a baby emerging from the ground. There's an open book with a ripped document and key, as well as a fire in the background, making it look as some type of ritual. Paracelsus believed that the human body was a microcosm of the universe, and he sought to understand the secrets of creation by studying the human body itself. In his quest for knowledge, he turned to alchemy, which he saw as a means of unlocking the mysteries of nature. One of his most famous quotes, "Let no man belong to another who can belong to himself," speaks to his belief in the individual's ability to harness the powers of nature in the universe. In his book, De Natura Rerum, Paracelsus wrote extensively about the creation of a homunculus, a small, artificially created humanoid. He believed that through alchemical processes, it was possible to create life from inanimate matter, and he detailed a specific recipe for creating a homunculus. The process involved placing human sperm inside a glass vial and sealing it with a special alchemical seal. The vial was then buried in horse manure for 40 days, after which a small transparent humanoid would allegedly begin to form. Paracelsus claimed that the homunculus would continue to grow and develop over time, eventually gaining the ability to speak and perform tasks. He believed that the homunculus could be used for various purposes, such as healing, divination, and even controlling the weather. His writings on the homunculus have been both praised and criticized, with some scholars arguing that his ideas were a precursor to modern genetic engineering, while others dismissed them as the ramblings of a madman. So again, which is it? Well, let's take a look at the writing of Paracelsus himself. But it's important to note that some scholars, such as William R. Newman in his Promethean Ambitions, describes this as pseudo-Paracelsus. The text is genuine, but apparently another alchemist released this under his name. Regardless, it's still classified as a book of Paracelsus. In his book De Natura Rerum, or Of the Nature of Things in 9 books, we will read what Paracelsus had to say, because many times when looking to the homunculus or watching documentaries on the subject, you really just get a quote from the experiment. But to put this more into context, we're going to read the beginning of book 1, which deals with generations. We're going to take a look at a German version or reprint from 1584. We got this translated into a much more readable version, and there's an English version published in 1650 that can confirm the accuracy of the translation. In book 1, he first starts with the most important topic it would seem, quote, generations. But it's key to note that this is not limited to just homunculi, but it's a part of a greater topic. Quote, the generation of all natural things is twofold, natural and without art, or artificial and visualized by the alchemist. End quote. Paracelsus tells us straight and simple. It's his first point really. Putrefaction is the key to the generation of all natural things. We'll discuss this more in detail later. But listen to this part carefully. I'm paraphrasing, but, quote, Book on Nature 1. It may be possible for humans to be born without natural fathers and mothers. That is to say, they can be born not from a woman's body in a natural way, as other humans are born, but through the art and expertise of an experienced spagyric alchemist. A human may thus grow and be born, as will be further explained. Quote, it is also possible in nature that humans can be born from animals, having their natural causes. However, it cannot happen without heresy. That is, when a human mixes with an animal, and the animal, like female, takes in the sperm of a man with lust and desire in its womb, and encloses it. In this case, the sperm must go through decay, and through the constant warmth of the body. A human, and not an animal, will be born. For every time the sperm is sown, a fruit grows from it. If this did not happen, it would be against the philosophers and against the light of nature. For as the seed is, so a fruit grows from it. From onion seeds grow onions, not peas, not nuts, not lettuce. So from various grains, different plants grow. This is explaining to you what they were thinking. Not only create humans without natural fathers and mothers, but to be born without a mother entirely. Then he goes further to explain how you can even birth these humans out of animals. Okay, wait. What are we even talking about here? Quote, it is also possible, and not against nature, that a woman and a person can give birth to an animal, and is not to be judged with a woman in this like with a man. That is, one should not regard her as transgressor, as if she acted against nature, but rather attribute such things to her imagination. For her imagination is often to blame for many things. For the imagination of a pregnant woman is so great that she can transform the seed and the fruit in her body in many ways. For her inner astral forces act so strongly and powerfully upon her fruit that they give an impression and influence. Therefore, the child stands in the mother's body in the creation, in the mother's hand and will, like clay in the potter's hand, from oats to oats, from barley to barley, and the like with all other fruits. What has seeds and is sown. We will explain this more later, but he's essentially saying that women have the ability to be alchemists and shape their babies through the use of their imagination. But we must clarify that we're speaking of a different type or tier of imagination, as will be further explained. Okay, so now we're about to get to the full breakdown of this art of generation, and let's remember, this typically does not get brought up when discussing homunculi, which leads many modern scholars to doubt the legitimacy of the claims. But if we're diving deep into how detailed and vast this science really was, they were playing around with the power to generate life artificially. But even more importantly, they could influence the outcome. Quote 5. And as you know now, through putrefaction, many and various things are born and become alive. So now you should know that from many herbs, through putrefaction, very wondrous animals are born, as experienced people know. It is important to note that such animals which grow and are born from within decay all have some toxicity with them and are poisonous, some more powerful and stronger than others, and each is shaped and formed differently from the other. as you can see in snakes, vipers, toads, frogs, scorpions, basilisks, spiders, wild ants, various worms, caterpillars, moths, beetles, all of which grow and are born from within decay. End quote. Quote, it is also no less true that many monsters are born among animals, and these are their offspring, which often happens that they give birth to an animal or another monster from human seed, according to the strong imagination of the mother on the child. They often grow from decay themselves and are brought about in a glass, as has been reported. The same often appears in many and wondrous shapes and forms, so terrifying to behold, as often with many heads, with many feet, with many tails, sometimes of many colors, sometimes worms with fish tails or wings, and other strange forms, the likes of which have never been seen before. Therefore, all these creatures are monsters that have no parents and are not born from other animals of their kind, but rather grow from other things and are brought forth and created through art, as you will see with the basilisk. End quote. Quote, but it is not here to deal with these homunculi, since they can be generated naturally and artificially, as from the greater matter and the lesser matter, such as from man and from monkeys, from horses and from donkeys, and from many other animals. End quote. Let's remember that donkey for later. But there you go. In clear language, he's explaining what this is really about, generating any animal you please, hybrids, and creating humans or any type of life in a variety of different wombs. Again, Reddy did not debunk spontaneous generation or the artificial generation of the alchemist. Remember who we're reading from? This is from Paracelsus himself, one of the founders of the scientific method. There's no reason to believe that this information is false, or at least it would seem that the author and many of his followers believed it to be true. They could have been creating all types of different beings. Also, on the basilisk, it would seem that the alchemists during this time had a certain issue, which we'll go into detail on as we progress, but to take a note, the basilisk is considered as the feminine evil twin, some kind of feminine evil that gets brought forth during the experiment, and this can manifest in different ways. The basilisk is a type of homunculus created by the alchemists as a result of the putrefaction of menstrual blood and thus female-derived. Some scholars argue that this was a form of early female medieval misogyny. There may be more to it than just that, as we're dealing with two different qualities of results. In De Natura Rerum, another reason why some scholars bring question to the author is because it shares many similarities with older Arabic texts, and in Paracelsus' other work, De Homunculi, he takes the approach to using a womb instead, as it seems the method of creating it in a bottle came with some problems that needed to be solved. Now before we leave De Natura Rerum, or The Nature of Things, I want to read the actual quote from the book of the experiment because I'm going to show you how you really don't get the full context. If you try reading the English one from the 17th century, it's still pretty difficult to read. You can understand the words, but it's more difficult to process what's actually being said. So this is a translation based on the German version and then checked with the English version. Quote, now the generation of the artificial man is also not to be forgotten in its own way. There's something to it, although such has been kept in great secrecy until now and has been completely hidden, and not without a small doubt and question and secret of the ancient philosophers whether it is also possible for nature and art that a human being can be born outside a woman's body and a natural mother. End quote. So wait, he's telling you straight up that this is the biggest secret and it's ancient in origin. Quote, to this, I give the answer that is not contrary to the art of the spagyric and nature in its own way, but it's entirely possible. How such access and occurrence may be, its process is as follows. Namely, that the sperm of a man enclosed in a sealed cucurbit with the highest putrefaction in the belly of a horse is putrefied for 40 days, or as long as it takes to become alive and move and stir, just like this. It becomes visible after some time. After such time, it will appear to be somewhat like human, yet transparent, without a body. When it is, then daily fed with the arcana, a whitish substance. Remember this whitish stuff for later. And nourished until 40 weeks have passed and kept in the constant warmth of a horse's belly. It will become a living human being, resembling another child born from a woman, but much smaller. We will call this a homunculus, and it should be raised like any other child with great care and attention until it reaches maturity. This is the greatest and highest secret that God has allowed mortal and sinful humans to know. It is a miracle and a great work of God, a mystery above all mysteries, and should remain a secret until the end of time when nothing will be hidden and everything will be revealed. End quote. Okay then, they were creating humans without a mother. It resembled any other child born from a woman. Okay, so it's not just a tiny human? And that they could raise these things, it seems. But let's remember what he said. This is the greatest and highest secret. The secret of generation and putrefaction. There is another component to this, as we said. There are multiple layers, and we will cover them all. But he does continue to say that these homunculus then go on to change to become magical beings of different kinds. The layer between the astral and physical have led many modern scholars to perceive this as mere fantasy, but there really is no reason to conclude that just yet. We must take into consideration that Paracelsus, being one of the founders of modern chemistry and one of the earliest to experiment with homunculus, was specifically being cryptic. That's important to note because it allows one for interpretation, but furthermore, it explains on why this is still a mystery. Because whoever was looking into this stuff at the time truly did not want this to be unveiled in detail to society. The methods are never clear, but almost as a cryptic message to inform other brothers, and we are left with the remainders to piece together the puzzle. Well, it's clear that Paracelsus is bringing importance to the subject of generation, and that there are two forms, natural and artificial. This would essentially mean that a homunculus is a science and art of artificial generation, guided and directed by an experienced alchemist, and the variety and forms therein are numerous and they can be combined with any animal. Now the deeper level is that he's actually discussing how to use natural chambers or rooms for the artificial creation of a homunculus. He's saying, yeah, you can do this with a lot of different animals. This will be confirmed as we look through more sources. And we're not just talking about making more animals by artificial insemination. It's actually different and much more occult. They're talking about the creation of chimeras, like literally growing a human in different wombs from different animals. What kind of minds are we dealing with here? Because this doesn't make sense to be just some made-up fantasy. There are many details to this process. Don't believe it? Well, let's continue. So the main quote from Paracelsus on the homunculus is literally a recipe where he uses a horse as a surrogate mother of the homunculus, and the semen of a human male is left inside the womb of the animal to putrefy for 40 days. Then the homunculus is born. Paracelsus also makes reference to the phoenix as an alchemical symbol. Quote, Paracelsus, his way for the raising of a dead bird to life, and for the generating many serpents of one, both which are performed by putrefaction. A bird is restored to life thus, viz., take a bird, put it alive into a gourd glass, and seal it hermetically, burn it to ashes in the 3rd degree of fire, then putrefy it in horse dung into a mucilaginous phlegm, and so by a continued digestion that phlegm must be brought into a further maturity, being taken out and put into an oval vessel of just a bigness to hold it, by an exact digestion and will become a renewed bird, which, saith Paracelsus, is one of the greatest wonders in nature, and shows the great virtue of putrefaction. Cut a serpent into small pieces, which put into a gourd glass, which you must hermetically seal up, then putrefy them in horse dung, and the whole serpent will become living again in the glass, in the form either of worms or spawn of fishes. Now if these worms be in fitting manner brought out of the putrefaction and nourished, many hundred serpents will be bred out of one serpent, whereof every one will be as big as the first. And as it is said of the serpent, so also many other living creatures may be raised and restored again. End quote. Now we're going to look at historical authors from the same time period who wrote on the homunculus, because this will prove that multiple minds had time to debunk this supposed theory and put it to rest, but that's not what happened. Cornelius Agrippa, renowned German polymath and occult writer, was born of a noble family, and he had several influential texts that played a pivotal role in the culture of the Renaissance. Interestingly, Many scholars take note that he was not only a secret agent, physician, and legal scholar. Supposedly, he set up a secret society in Paris devoted to the occult. In his 3 books of occult philosophy, he alludes to the homunculus in many ways. He first tells a story of a hen giving birth to a man in a strange way. Quote, also, domestic birds are not without some augurias, for cocks by their crowing promote hope in the journey of him that is undertaking. Moreover, Livia, the mother of Tiberius, when she was great with him, took a hen egg, and it hatched in her bosom, and at length came forth a cock-chick with a great comb, which then auguries interpreted that the child that should be born of her should be a king. End quote. We can confirm that Agrippa is not telling us everything when he discusses the nature of blood and the basilisk's special abilities, which was discussed by Paracelsus, so we know that he's read his work. He mentions the basilisk over 6 times. This is a symbolic reference as well to the homunculus. At this time, it was hush-hush, so they had to be more cryptic and fantastical, but they considered this to be 100% real. The basilisk is an alchemical creature. Quote, they say also that the blood of a basilisk, which they call the blood of Saturn, hath such great force in sorcery, that it procures for him that carries it about him good success of his petitions from great men in power, and of his prayers from God, and also remedies of diseases, and grant any privilege. End quote. He's just only covering the negative twin of the homunculus. Quote, again, in the vapors of the eyes there is a great power, that they can bewitch and infect any that are near them, as the cockatrice or basilisk, killing men with their looks. End quote. I'm not saying that every person that mentions the basilisk is being symbolic, but it's safe to assume that Agrippa was well aware of the homunculus. Robert Flood, a renowned English Paracelsian physician, held a diverse array of interests that encompassed both scientific and occult domains. As a prominent figure in the early 17th century, he delved into various fields such as astrology, mathematics, cosmology, Kabbalah, and Rosicrucianism. His penchant for exploring the esoteric side of knowledge often led him to engage with contemporary scientists and thinkers of his time, notably engaging in a series of exchanges with the esteemed astronomer Johannes Kepler. Flood's rich contributions to the fields of occult philosophy make him a significant figure when examining the concept of the homunculus. He's remembered as an astrologer, mathematician, cosmologist, Kabbalist, and Rosicrucian. Now it's interesting because we'll see this double-fingered pose with these figures associated with secret societies. Also, if we look at the coat of arms of the Hidden Knight, we're going to come back to Flood because he was associated with John Dee and studied with the Jesuits, even went to Oxford, and his father was a high-ranking government official, the treasurer for Queen Elizabeth I. The collage of 12 coat of arms of Flood's ancestors are shown in the painting above his right shoulder. His paternal arms goes back to Werid Blade, whose name originates from Welsh meaning bloody or red wolf. Martin Ruland the Elder, 1532 to 1602, was a German alchemist, physician, and writer. He authored several works on alchemy, and he's best known for his Lexicon Alchemiae, a comprehensive dictionary of alchemical terms and concepts. Quote, homunculi are small images, which contain within themselves an invisible starry human being, made in the likeness of humans. Small human portraits, or images made of humans, that have the invisible celestial human in their brain. End quote. That's a rough translation, but he does bring it up, also connecting the images component. Giambattista della Porta, 1535 to 1615, was an Italian polymath, scholar, and author known for his various works in scientific fields, including natural philosophy, optics, and cryptography. He was also interested in alchemy. His book, Natural Magic, is a book that we brought up in the past, and it definitely deserves its own video, but for now that'd probably take too much time. However, there are some interesting things discussed, such as the generation of hybrids and monsters. But not just that, it goes into a sort of animal husbandry that involves the mixing of animals to create new strange creatures, as the author puts it. There are also several historical accounts in the book from notable authors where he not only agrees with Paracelsus, but references several ancient Roman and Greek authors. These authors include several reputable sources, such as Pliny, Ovid, and Aristotle, all discussing the nature of putrefaction and generation. He makes it clear in the prologue that natural magic is the top and the complete faculty of natural science. It's important to note this because modern science, although the child of alchemy, has completely left out the most important part of its application, the knowledge and understanding of magic. This may be outside the scope of the video, but it's important to understand, and we will cover this, as magic is the father of all sciences. He continues to say that the knowledge in the book unveils the secrets and history of this natural magic. Then, in chapter 1, which deals with putrefaction, saying essentially the same as Paracelsus, that new creatures can be generated through putrefaction, but he details the history, stating that Porphyry thought that living creatures were begotten of the bowels of the earth, soaked in water and quickened by the heat of the sun. Of the same mind were Archelaus the Athenian, Anaxagoras, Cosmenius, and Euripides his scholar, Cleodemus, and after him Theophrastus, thought that they came of purified water mixed with earth, and the colder and fouler the water was, the more unfit it was for their generation. Diodorus and many other good philosophers hold that all living creatures did arise of putrefaction. Now, to explain putrefaction to those who may not understand what we're discussing, the best way to think about it is fermentation. But when these alchemists are referring to this process, they really mean like a fundamental aspect of our reality, that putrefaction is the transformative process that occurs within matter, naturally. All things go through decay and transformation, even in a controlled environment. The alchemists sought to understand the mechanics of putrefaction, or in other words, the secret workings of the universe. Why do things break down and go under change? They truly believed that they had found the secret to this process and how to influence it. For now, I'll leave it at that. There's no direct reference to Homunculus in his work, but he discusses the secret thought process behind it, and it's a good reference to see how serious they were about this subject, and also that they were the leading thinkers of their time, instructing others who also believed it to be true. The only reason this could be as clearly stated in the book is that certain rituals and processes of generation were evident to these alchemists. I'll bring this book up later, but we shall proceed. Oswald Kroll, or Crollius, 1563 to 1609, was an alchemist and professor of medicine at the University of Marburg in Hesse, Germany. A strong proponent of alchemy in using chemistry and medicine, he was heavily involved in writing books and influencing thinkers of his day towards viewing chemistry and alchemy as two separate fields. Now that may be the case, but that doesn't mean he thought they should be separated, as from his book Basilica Chemica, there are clear Rosicrucian and alchemical symbols showing the cryptic nature of the art. He even makes mention to Paracelsus saying, quote, "But none of the immortals, with the true word of pardon, in the whole of philosophy and medicine, with undoubted heavenly favor, has known such hard and hidden secrets, and brought them into public domain as Theophrastus, that Paracelsus, a man and philosopher of all eternity, memory, and honor most worthy, whose skill no one has yet been found who can touch, much less surpass, the true monarch of medicine and the first physician of the microcosm." End quote. This is another credible source verifying the works of Paracelsus. Johann Hartmann, 1568 to 1631, in 1609 became the first professor of chemistry at the University of Marburg. His teaching dealt mainly with pharmaceuticals. Quote, in Lecture 23, The Arcanum of Hermes Philosophy, Sendivogius says that there are two types of dissolutions, although there are many other useless dissolutions. One is only truly natural, and the second is violent, under which all others are included. The natural one is such that the pores of the body are opened in our water, so that the digested semen is emitted and placed in its matrix. Our water, however, is heavenly, not wetting the hands, not of the common people, but almost like rainwater. The body is gold, which gives semen. Our moon is not common silver, it receives the semen of gold. In Treatise 10 of the New Light of Alchemy, Saturn, having accepted the vessel, threw the water parts 10 times, and immediately took the fruit of the solar tree and placed it. And I saw the fruit of the tree consumed and dissolved like ice in hot water. This water is like a woman to this fruit, No other thing can the fruits of this tree putrefy except in this water, nor can any other water penetrate the pores of this fruit except this one, and know that the solar tree also comes from this water, which is drawn from the rays of the sun and moved by the force of the magnet. Therefore, it has the great harmony between them. End quote. Just in case he wasn't making it clear that he's hinting towards something, he continues, quote, in the dialogue of Mercury, regarding this feminine seed or adepts dissolving waters, we have decided to discuss with you the dissolving waters at this moment. This alchemical treasure is indeed great and immense, but for everyone who does not possess the individual keys to the storehouse, without which not even the adepts themselves could dissolve or coagulate the bodies, it is completely inaccessible. If you are ignorant of the dissolution of our body, there is no need to work, warns Dionysius Zacharias. Quote, whoever knows the art and secret of dissolution reaches the secret of art. Michael Meyer, 1568-1622, was a German physician and counselor to Rudolf II Habsburg. He was a learned alchemist, epigrammist, and amateur composer. He also happened to be Imperial Count Palatine. He doesn't actually mention homunculus directly, but in his book, Atlanta Fusions, the entire thing is a metaphor for him pursuing golden apples. It's based on the Greek myth of Atalanta, a virgin hunter who was raised by bears, but it is more so a reference to the race when Hippomenes took apples in front of Atalanta. Unable to resist, she lost the race because she picked up the apples and was forced to marry. So this is a symbol for these alchemists, and each one of these emblems is a secret. One of them, Emblem 21, specifically deals with the homunculus. I'm sure that many of you guys have seen these engravings before. It's been seen by many eyes. This is a secret code for the development of the homunculus, or artificial generation. Quote, Emblem 21. Make a circle from the man and woman, then a square. From that triangle, make a circle, and you will have the Philosopher's Stone. Epigram 21. Let the man and woman be united as one circle from which a square arises having equal sides. From here draw a triangle that is rounded on every side into a sphere, then the stone will be born. If such a thing does not come to your mind soon, if you understand the doctrine of geometry, you will know everything. There are a few more references in here that equally could be considered, but we will show a few of the emblems and then continue on. Not only are there several occult alchemical symbols such as the hermaphrodite, they even have Miss Liberty, floating cubes in the sky, the Lion of Venice, mermaids, and even an early Freemason candle symbolism, which we'll see this repeated many times. It's also important to mention that, yes, around this time there were many charlatans and frauds. True alchemists disguised and encoded their secrets with